Hello everybody, I'm trying to be more proactive with writing about movies that I watch, so I'm trying out this format, which is, kind of popular right now. So I'm going to go through everything I watched the first month of 2024. Here we go! So I started this new year by watching 31 movies, so one movie a day average, so we're off to a pretty good start here. I really wanted to catch up on some movies from 2023 that I missed, but instead I began 2024 by rewatching Terror Vision. I feel like I have different opinions when discussing what is the, quote, most 80s movie of all time. I feel like this is a pretty good contender, mostly for the completely over-the-top tone. Everything is so gaudy and exaggerated to pretty much extreme levels. It feels like a movie made outside of the 80s that's doing an exaggerated parody of the 80s. And it actually made me think of a movie I just watched yesterday called Lisa Frankenstein. I mean, there's a metalhead character named O.D., the daughter is dressed just like Cyndi Lauper meets Madonna. The little brother is right out of the Goonies. The alien that comes out of the TV is a gross Rob Bottin-like creation. The parents are swingers with S&M pictures everywhere. Their whole house is like an 80s nightmare. It's just a bizarre movie. I don't even know if I like it, but it's a true oddity that must be examined. Then I watched Dragons of Forever starring Jackie Chan, which was a Blu-ray I got for Christmas. I love this era of Jackie Chan movies. We need to bring back more rom-coms that also just end with some of the best fight scenes ever put to celluloid. I then took myself out to the theater and watched Poor Things, and then I realized that I very much messed up making my 2023 best of video, because this is definitely my favorite movie of 2023. The influence of Terry Gilliam is alive and well. This was so funny, so biting, and also beautiful, weird, and also would kind of make a great double feature with Barbie. Though with Barbie I felt like some of the empowering message felt kind of cheesy at times. Here it does it in such a hilarious and matter-of-fact way with this layer of nuance while also asking questions about sexual liberation, mental competency, capitalism. It's just a lot of movie and it makes it look effortless. It's also got some of the best cinematography of the entire year. I will throw my shoe at the screen during the Oscars if it loses. So yeah, best movie of 2023. Then I watched Airplane, which I hadn't seen in maybe like 10 years or so. For a while, this movie had a reputation as one of the funniest movies ever made. I even saw this on one of those list shows on like VH1 or the E! Channel. Anybody remember the E! Channel? Where this was actually voted the funniest movie of all time. And I think culture has just shifted over the last 20 years and pushed it down a little bit. Maybe it's because of its age. I mean, not a lot of comedies from the 70s remain in the cultural zeitgeist. But also, I just think this movie is just okay. Don't get me wrong, I like the Zucker brothers a lot. I just don't think this is their funniest movie. For me, that's probably The Naked Gun, and I even like Top Secret better than Airplane. So yeah, maybe that's a hot take. I don't know. But Airplane, it's just fine. Then I watched Society of the Snow on Netflix. So I was mildly obsessed with this story after hearing about it on 2 separate podcasts and thinking, wow, this would make a great movie or maybe a limited series, especially updated from the whitewashed version from 1993. And this is about as perfect of a film adaptation that I could have imagined. I still think they probably could have fleshed out the characters more if this had been an 8-episode series, but the important thing is that it still captures that visceral emotion and intensity that the craziest true survival story I've ever heard of deserves. Then I watched The Incredible Shrinking Man on the Criterion Channel. This was an interesting little science fiction adventure film. I was surprised how much of the film, pretty much the entire second half, just takes place in this guy's basement, which because he keeps shrinking starts to feel like another planet. I'm sure this had a lot of inspiration on, movies I grew up with like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, in the way that movie turned an entire backyard into a jungle. I actually expected this to be a lot sillier, but the ending was surprisingly existential and weirdly moving. Then I watched Good Grief on Netflix. I'm a fan of Dan Levy, so I was curious to see what he would do with his first film as a director, and it's unfortunately a disappointment. I'm not opposed to a movie about sad rich people being sad in beautiful places, but this just didn't have much wind in the sails. It spends way too much time having overly important monologues about loss, doesn't do a whole lot of actual trusting the audience to wrestle with those ideas. It's also just not as funny as I think it should have been. I'm sure Dan Levy will get another shot to make something a little bit more interesting next time. Then my wife and I watched A Walk to Remember, which is a movie she loved when she was a kid, and a movie I watched as a kid because I had a crush on Mandy Moore. It's very cheesy. Okay, moving on. Then we watched No Hard Feelings on Netflix. I gotta be honest, I'm not a huge Jennifer Lawrence fan. This kind of started pretty strong. I like Andrew Barth Feldman. I think he's great. His comedic timing is a highlight. And I'm excited to see where he goes from here. But ultimately, I thought this was also just trying to be too serious a lot of the time. I know a lot of comedies have shades of serious stuff and aren't afraid to, dive into darker subject matter. But this just felt like it shifted gears way too fast throughout the entire runtime. Then it began to snow here in Arkansas, which doesn't happen that much, so everything shut down. And when it snows here, I want to watch movies with snow in them, so I watched Grumpy Old Men, which I had never seen. And it was cute. It is cute. It's great to see movies like this, which were like big hits when they came out, and look at them through today's lens. This would be like an indie movie today, but this was in the top 20 highest grossing movies of 1994. Amazing. Continuing our movies with snow in them, my wife showed me Anastasia for the first time. I avoided this movie as a kid. Even then I could tell this wanted to be a Disney movie, but just wasn't. And I think that's the movie's biggest hindrance. This could have been dark and interesting, like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, but the main antagonist doesn't even do anything for 90% of the movie. I also just don't really care for the way Don Bluth animates humans. They're always moving around too much and it looks very unnatural. Continuing to be snowed in, me and my wife watched Bean. I then caught up with Anatomy of a Fall, one of the last Oscar movies that I finally got to sit down and watch, and I thought it was extremely riveting and very well crafted. It was fascinating taking this conceit of a mystery and it ended up being more of a meditation on how to even process when someone close to you dies. It's just an excellently made movie. I don't feel like as strongly about it as I do a lot of the other nominees. I'm also pretty sure that the dad just danced his way out the window. I then headed over to the Criterion Channel again and watched Design for Living, a really great Ernst Lubitsch pre-code comedy, which if you haven't heard of is about a love triangle between two men and one woman, and at the end of the movie they decide to be a throuple together, which, you don't see in a lot of movies from the 30s. Then I rewatched 8th Grade, which I just kind of stumbled upon when I was browsing movies, and I hadn't seen this since the theaters, which is 5 years ago. Jeez, time is weird. I really hope Bo Burnham makes another movie, because, man, he's good at it. Then back to the Criterion Channel, I watched Basquiat, starring a very young Jeffrey Wright, also featuring David Bowie as Andy Warhol. Why don't we talk about this more?
I don't know. For a milk and a bar some money.
As well as a bunch of other stellar actors. I really liked how this movie does provide insight into the issues of race within the art community. Even if the structure by today's standards is a bit by the book in the genre of biopics, there's some cliches that it avoids and then some it just dives right into. I mean, for the guy who made The Diving Bell and The Butterfly, this feels pretty average. Jeffrey Wright is amazing. I'm glad after all these years he's finally getting the recognition he deserves. Then I rewatched The Favorite, which is even better than I remember it. It just solidified for me that Yorgos Lanthimos is one of the best living directors right now. Then I watched the original Fright Night, which I recently got on 4K, and it looked amazing. This is just a great horror comedy to put on a Friday night while eating pizza. Then I watched The Thing from Another World, which didn't do a lot for me. I mean, it's really tough to compare it to the remake. It's one of the best movies ever. I don't know, I think there are really good horror movies from this period, but I just wasn't feeling the tension with this one. Then I watched the 1966 Batman movie, which is hilarious. I had this on VHS as a kid, but I hadn't seen it in years, and I think this actually works better as an adult. The jokes are just so absurd. I love the TV show too and would definitely recommend that, but if you're just a little curious, I'd give this a watch first. This is kind of a great best of sampler of the TV show. Then I watched Ridley Scott's Legend, the theatrical cut, and oh my god, I loved it so much. There was so much glitter. There has never been more glitter than there was in this movie. It's a total acid trip fantasy tone poem, one of the best looking fantasy movies ever. I mean, this is just what total effort looks like. Then back to the movie theater and I saw American Fiction, which I liked a lot. I saw the trailer for this several months ago and at the time I didn't think it looked that great, but luckily they saved all the good jokes for the actual movie. It's a lot more clever and biting than originally I thought it would be. It does take a little while to get going. I probably would have cut maybe 15 minutes from the beginning of this, but it's very funny, has an incredible prescient message. I don't know if it's going to win any Academy Awards just because it's a pretty stacked year this year, but if anything, I'd be happy if Sterling K. Brown won for Best Supporting. He's just phenomenal in this. Then back to the Criterion Channel and I watched Babyface, which I'd watched originally in film school, but I wanted to show it to my wife. Another great pre-code movie from the 30s, which feels way more modern than a lot of movies that came after it. This movie just rules. Then I watched Elia Kazan's Splendor in the Grass, which I didn't know anything about, and wow, total knockout of a movie. It's one of those early 60s movies where you can just feel the later half of the decade bubbling under the surface. You could also just read this as a severe indictment on purity culture, but also just the American puritanical method which most people were raised in. People are still raised like this today. It's insane. The fact that Natalie Wood didn't win an Oscar for this movie is just completely idiotic. Then I watched the remake of Fright Night, and man, I personally think this should be included in one of the better horror remakes. I mean, the cast is really stellar, with the late and great Anton Yelchin, Colin Farrell being a perfect updated version of the sleazy cool vampire, David Tennant as Peter Vincent. I'm really mad we didn't get a spin-off series with this character. Anyway, super fun movie overall. Then I watched Blade Runner, cause Legend got me feeling the Ridley Scott appreciation. I definitely like this movie the more times I watch it. I watched the Ultimate Cut, by the way, which I think is probably the best cut so far. Just from a production standpoint, this is another masterpiece. I mean, the three punch of like Alien, Blade Runner, and Legend, Ridley Scott was just out here making some of the best looking movies of all time. Then I ended the month by checking out Kelly Reichardt's most recent movie, Showing Up. I really vibe with Kelly Reichardt. I mean, I just love the way she sits in environments and lets the audience really absorb the space. Her pacing and cinematography is unlike really anything else. Her film from a few years ago, First Cow, was hugely influential on me when I made my thesis film 2 years ago. That being said, I didn't love Showing Up. I thought Michelle Williams was maybe doing a little too much with her performance, which is funny because this is a pretty minimalist movie with a character that doesn't really make any big moves. I don't know, this is one that I'm gonna need to sit with for a while and revisit later on. It could be that the themes of artistic frustration and personal resentment left me a little cold to the overall story. Just like the lack of artistic statements at the main character's art show, I'm left wondering what it all meant. And that was January. Woo! If you want to take a look at what I'm watching in real time, you can head over to my Letterboxd, or just wait around for the next video to be uploaded. Either way, I can't wait for freaking winter to be over. Okay, bye!
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.